This movie begins with Marcia smoking a cigarette at the door of her house. Libby takes her 2 kids into her car and drives off. They're not on speaking terms. Libby drives to Atwater. She arrives at her destination where Jean, Marcia's sister, welcomes them. Libby's kids, Abby and Tank, acknowledge Jean's friendly demeanor, something Marcia doesn't have. Jean is so pleased to have Libby and her kids. She runs a farm and tells them that she doesn't mind the kids playing with the livestock. That evening, as they have dinner, Aunt Jean talks about Frank, her supposed husband who never legally married her. Frank, who was an artist, passed on 10 years ago, but before then, they lived together as if they were husband and wife. After dinner, the kids request to be shown the dishwasher, but Jean doesn't use a dishwasher. She also doesn't use a microwave or a dryer and doesn't have a TV. Abby and Tank have never been in such a situation before. Libby hopes the house has a bathtub, but Jean also doesn't have one. She offers to help the kids with their baths while Libby does the dishes. Libby would prefer to help the kids with their baths, but Jean insists. The kids are done having their shower, and while they clean up, Jean notices a scar on Abby's leg. Abby got the scar from the time she and her dad had an accident. Jean also has a scar on her arm, so she shows the kids. Jean steps out and finds Libby sitting idle in the cold, so she hands her sweatshirt. Libby apologizes for the inconvenience both her and the kids' stay would cause Jean. Danny's passing has made things difficult for her. She promises that she'll leave as soon as possible. Jean is sure Marcia must have said a lot of awful things about her to Libby. She hopes that she can get along with Libby throughout the time she's staying. Jean and Marcia haven't been the best of sisters. They're always at loggerheads. Libby remembers the time Marcia and Jean had a face-off at her granddad's funeral. The next morning, Abby and Tank just finished having breakfast, and they loved the meal. Libby joins them in the kitchen and finds them still gushing about the meal. James, Jean's farm manager, enters the house. Aunt Jean introduces him to Libby and they shake hands. James looks greasy, making Abby tease that James looks like a werewolf. James doesn't mind. He can take a joke. Jean tells Libby that James will be teaching her how to run a farm. Libby is perplexed. To the best of her knowledge, she hasn't applied for any farm lessons. Jean thinks it's probably needed as James won't be around forever, and Libby needs a job. Libby doesn't see herself ever working on a farm. James concurs with Libby that she can never be a farmer. Jean tells Libby to eat up and hit the farm. Libby argues that it's a holiday, but Jean breaks the news to her. There are no holidays on the farm. Jean then takes the kids and steps out. It's Libby's first lecture as a farmer. Jean has told James to start from scratch with Libby, so James begins by jovially differentiating between a goat and a fowl. He goes on to call the goats by their given names, all to Libby's surprise. James starts extracting milk from the goats in the weirdest fashion. He uses the extractor on the goat but tells her that it is standard procedure for the music to play while the extraction takes place. Libby is livid with James's modus operandi. James says that's the only way the goats can give good milk. James informs Libby that Jean and Frank have plans to expand the farm business. The first blow came when Frank passed on. He says that Aunt Jean went on with the plan, but she was diagnosed with arthritis, and it's making it hard for her. James insinuates that for this reason, Libby is possibly the heir to the farm. James then takes Libby to the walk-in refrigerator, where the goat cheese is stored, and Libby is impressed. James takes Libby to the farm's lake. The gate's lock is rusty, so Libby climbs over the gate. James promises to fix the gate as soon as possible. He also warns Libby to always leave doors the same way she meets them. Any door locked should remain locked, while any door opened should remain open. The next morning, Libby meets Jean and James in the kitchen. Exhausted from the previous day's tour, she can't tell how she slept so deep. She says she wants to go get the kids up, but Jean's done that. She's even taught the kids minor tasks in the farm, and they're doing that at the moment. James states it's almost time for another goat milking exercise, after which Libby has to drive to town for some supplies. Libby feels hard done by, but she requests to at least take a shower before she begins. James says she doesn't need to take a shower. Goats don't care if one smells nice. Libby pleads to at least brush her teeth. When Libby leaves, James tells Jean that her experiment with Libby will fail. He thinks they need an experienced hand and Libby's not the one. Libby drives James's car to get the supplies. She picks the items she needs and takes them to the counter where she meets Sunshine. While Sunshine attends to Libby, she notices a ring on Libby's finger and asks if Libby's married. Libby answers that she was married. Sunshine wants to know what happened to her husband, but Libby doesn't want to say. She tries to avoid answering, but Sunshine politely presses on. Libby divulges that her husband is gone. The answer seems ambiguous to Sunshine and wants Libby to clarify what she means. Libby reiterates that her husband is just gone. Sunshine quizzes further. Libby isn't having it. She picks up the supplies and leaves even without taking her change. On her way home, Libby's new reality stares at her, and it dawns on her that her life has taken a new turn. A turn not in any way positive. She pulls the car over and cries bitterly for a while. Getting home, Libby asks Jean for a moment. Jean allows her to have her moment but asks that she return in 10 minutes. Libby returns, wearing an overall. Jean is impressed because Libby looks like a farmer. Jean teaches Libby how to make chèvre, after which Libby begins appreciating Jean for allowing her and the kids to stay with her till she finds her feet again. Libby says she's not cut out to be a farmer and wants Jean to get someone else when she leaves. Jean understands but wants Libby to do the best she can while she's available. It's dinner time. Jean and Abby prepare the dining table and Libby is impressed with Abby. Jean informs Libby that they're having a guest come over for dinner and asks Libby to freshen up. As Libby walks upstairs, she finds James playing with Tank, and this puts a smile on her face. Sadly, James doesn't know how to respond to these kinds of gestures. Russ, Jean's boyfriend, and Sunshine, Russ's granddaughter, walk in. Jean introduces them to Libby, and Russ is very excited to see Libby. He even has a flower for her. He says it makes sense for him to try to win his lover's niece over. After dinner, James takes the kids outside and gives them lessons on defending themselves from bullies. Abby and Tank later go to sleep while the adults converge outside. Sunshine goes to sit with Libby and apologizes for freaking her out the other day. She reads people's palms and wants to read Libby's. James warns that she's probably freaking Libby out again. Libby reluctantly allows Sunshine to read her palms, and she tells Libby a few things about her. She reads that Libby is a strong woman who has a lot of love in her. She says she sees Libby having 2 families. She also tells Libby that her life is about to change, and this draws Libby's attention. Libby thinks her life has already changed with the sad turn of events. James takes his leave, and while he walks away, Sunshine places her hand on Libby. Connected to the supernatural realm, she tells Libby that her husband isn't really gone. Libby, now freaked out, quickly pulls Sunshine's hand off her. It's bedtime, and Libby is finding it hard getting any sleep. Scenes of when her family was still intact flashed through her mind. She recalls how she had a premonition that something evil was lurking. Telling Danny didn't stop Danny from going out that day. Libby steps out to take fresh air when she finds the door leading to the walk-in refrigerator open. She picks a stick and decides to confront whoever or whatever might be inside. She enters the refrigerator and finds James. Not really expecting to see anyone, she's shocked and mistakenly closes the refrigerator door. The doorknob is bad, and this means they'll stay in there till someone comes to their rescue. James reminds Libby of the time he told her to be mindful of all the doors on the farm. Doors she meets open should remain open, while doors she meets closed should remain closed. The deed has been done, though. James zips up his jacket and throws a piece of cloth to Libby. The cold will hit them hard anytime soon. Knowing that they'd be spending the next hours there, Libby begins exercising to heat herself. James wants to know her story, and Libby obliges. She tells James that her husband perished, and she lost their house almost immediately. Living with Marcia isn't easy, and that's why she decided to come live with her aunt. James mentions he's divorced. His ex-wife got the house, so he's staying on the farm, which is quite convenient for him. James's good sense of humor makes the conversation a friendly one. James loves to hear more about Marcia, and Libby doesn't mind. Marcia, still very beautiful and vibrant, was married 4 different times. She was a travel agent, so she wasn't always available. Libby was 6 years old when Marcia decided that Libby didn't need a babysitter anymore. Libby recalls that she'd often lock herself in the closet and sleep off. The next morning, Russ drives to the farm and notices the door to the walk-in refrigerator wide open. His intuition was right. He opens the refrigerator and finds James and Libby sleeping in each other's arms. Russ's entrance wakes them up, and the both of them step out, blaming each other for their predicament. Abby is in school, and at the end of the class for the day, Jimmy walks up to Abby and teases her. Since Abby's accident with his father, she's had a limp. The kid calls Abby a limper, and Abby gets physical with Jimmy. That same day, the principal sends for Libby, and she tells Libby that the school has a low tolerance for violence. Abby would have to tease back anytime she's teased and refrain from getting physical. Libby then has a word with Abby. She's surprised that Abby can even hit someone, but Abby informs her that it was James who taught her the skills. Abby arrives at the farm and storms James's camper truck. She's pissed that James taught Abby offensive moves. She's more pissed that Abby didn't tell her about Jimmy, telling James instead. Abby didn't tell her because Libby would stress about it, which is exactly what she's doing at the moment. Libby sends Abby inside. She tries to scold James, but James explains that Abby was only trying to protect her. James thinks Abby has done the right thing, even though she's been suspended for a week. It's nighttime, and Libby has had enough time to think about the incident. She goes over to Abby's room to make things right. She acknowledges that Jimmy probably deserved to be hit. Abby misses her dad, and Libby misses him too. Abby would love more time on the farm because she loves the ambiance. Libby doesn't know what the future holds. She decides to sleep by Abby's side for the night. The next morning, Libby is on the farm before James. She's tending to the goats, singing along, smile broad and bright across her face. She's beginning to love working on the farm. When James sees her, he smirks. Libby's stay in Jean's house has become interesting. Jean teaches them how to make certain meals and the kids help. Jean brings out the fun in every activity, and the kids love it on the farm. Libby finds Jean where she's planting some seeds and joins her. She confesses how lovely the farm is. Jean expected this reaction from Libby. She knew that Libby would learn to accept the farm. Libby asks Jean how long it took for her to get over Frank. Jean lets out a heavy sigh and starts talking. She didn't think she'd ever get over Frank after he passed on. Sadness enveloped her, and the only thing she could do was remain indoors and brood. It was a gradual process for her. Life went on, and so she had to live life. Libby confesses that she sometimes gets overwhelmed, feeling like she's drowning. Jean understands perfectly what Libby is going through. She encourages her that healing will come to her soon. The next day, Libby and James are driving into town. James doesn't understand why Jean hadn't introduced Libby to the farm before. Libby explains that it's because she isn't cut out for a place like the farm. James wants to know if Libby intends to move back. Libby has no clear-cut plan yet, but infers she'd leave. She mentions that she has to get her life back on track and get an actual job. Her kids are her priority, and she wants them to attend college. James argues that college isn't a prerequisite for success. Libby tries to oppose James's assertion, but James floors her with a superior argument. James suggests that kids should rather be taught basic life and survival skills. Libby and James arrive at the market to sell cheese. She's attending to a customer, while James sits behind her reading a newspaper. A few of Libby's acquaintances notice her and come over. They're happy to see her. Libby excitedly sells cheese to them. Trying to act modest, she rejects the tip they've offered, but James makes her collect it. When James steps away from the stall, the ladies are fascinated that Libby gets to work with James because they consider him a sexy man. They infer that Libby has a thing with James, and Libby goes with the flow. This makes the ladies suggest that she must have not loved her husband. Libby excuses herself after James returns. She's in the restroom when the ladies come in and say mean things about her. Unknowingly to them, Libby can hear every word. She's almost moved to tears when one of the ladies mocks her about the estate sale after Libby's husband passed on. The woman is proud that she bought quite a few things at Libby's. Libby only comes out when the ladies leave. The ladies had laughed at her for looking so haggard, causing her to spend some time looking at her reflection in the mirror. She walks back to the stall, tears in her eyes, and tells James she needs to leave. Those women had just made fun of her, and James got it. With the women still hanging around, James decides to make a point. He pulls Libby close and kisses her passionately. The women, who had been hanging around to gawk at James's hot body, look uncomfortable, and quickly they leave. Meanwhile, Libby is lost in the moment, loving every second of it. That evening, while Libby and Jean have a chat, Marcia shows up. Jean isn't happy to see her, nor is Marcia happy to see Jean. Marcia is seated facing Libby and her kids, and she starts nagging. She thinks Libby has made a mistake staying on the farm. Libby doesn't want the kids to witness the conversation and sends them to bed. Marcia continues to tell Libby how she brought her up with the good things in life, but Libby doesn't agree with that. Leaving a young girl in a hotel room all by herself is never considered fair. Marcia wants Libby to come back to her. She says Libby isn't meant for a small place, but Libby would never go back to being treated like trash, so she asks that her mom respect that and let her be. Libby thanks her for letting her and the kids stay during a time they needed it, and then she says goodnight. Marcia steps out and sees Jean. She's sure that Jean must have revealed a certain secret to Libby, making Libby dislike her. The two women have a verbal scuffle, after which Marcia drives off. It's the next morning. Libby is on the farm when Sunshine comes to assist her. Sunshine learns the farm's dynamics, and Libby is proud. Sunshine recounts the time she stayed in LA and had a failed music career. She resorted to drinking heavily, and this messed her up. When Sunshine asks Libby how she found herself on the farm, she confesses that she doesn't have an idea what she's doing at the moment. Losing her husband changed the course of her life. She failed to talk to her husband about certain things. That evening, Sunshine takes Libby to the house Jean grew up in, a place everyone avoids because it's referred to as the Halloween house. Jean lights up some candles and sticks and begins calling on Danny's spirit. Libby doesn't take it seriously, but eventually begins pouring out her heart. She misses Danny so much and is sorry that she changed the routine on the day of his demise. She says she has herself to blame. She and the kids love Danny. Libby praises her for expressing her feelings. A forceful wind blows and puts out the candlelight. Sunshine confirms that it worked. It's morning, and Libby can't stop telling Jean her experience at the house the previous night. Jean wants to know if it worked for her, but Libby only mentions that she at least feels better. She wonders why Jean didn't keep staying in the house. Abby and Tank are ready for school, and Libby takes them. While they're gone, Jean looks at her and reminds her that she isn't her mother and must carve a path for herself. James is back to the farm looking all tired. Erin, his ex-wife, has a fragile health. Libby sends her warm wishes and hopes that James feels better. Jean soon notifies Libby that Abby has been badly injured in school. In no time, they're in Abby's school. Abby is bleeding from her head and her clothes are stained with blood. She remarks Jimmy kept pushing her against the fence, and she only used the F word. The headmistress, visibly angry, takes Libby to her office and reveals that Abby will have to go on another suspension. Libby is livid. She wonders why her daughter gets intimidated, but still ends up suspended because of a bad word. Libby verbally confronts the headmistress and tells her she's not doing her job properly. As they step out, James sees Jimmy and subtly warns him to steer clear of Abby. It's Jean's birthday party, and Libby is dressed in a white dress Jean gifted her. The pub is bubbly with a live band performing to the happy audience while they dance and have fun. Libby enters with her kids, and they're excited to see Jean. They exchange pleasantries, and Libby thanks Jean for the dress. In no time, they finish their meal, and Russ has only nice words to say to Jean. Russ takes Jean for a dance, and Libby heads over to get a drink. Sunshine walks in and is excited to see Libby. They chat for a little while and then hit the dance floor. Libby wanders to another side of the pub and finds James sitting idle. She joins James, who compliments her looks. Libby notices James's dull demeanor and finds it hard to muster words because she's trying to be careful. James is aware, so he tells her to feel free to ask about Erin. Yes, Libby wants to know about Erin, so James decides to indulge her. He's been coy on the matter and it hasn't helped. With a sad face, James tells Libby that he and Erin were together for 5 years. Erin found a job somewhere else and initiated a divorce against James's wish. Tragedy hit when Erin developed a stroke a few months into her new marriage. Erin's new guy couldn't keep up with her and her illness, so he moved on. James hopes that Erin's parents will come get her. James decides it's time to lift his spirits, so he takes Libby by the hands and leads her to the dance floor. As they move, James sings along with the music, directing the lyrics at her and creating a heartfelt moment between them. The mood grows intense, and sensing it, James quickly pulls back. He thanks Libby and then heads off. The next day, Libby returns to the old house. This time, she steps inside and looks around. She finds a telephone, and when she picks it up, a sudden flashback hits her. The sound of someone protesting Marcia's choice jolts her back to the present. Later, she discovers a note in the house, and its message makes her question if she's been loud and unsubtle. She walks up to Jean seeking answers. She wonders why she even knows the house. Jean is scared that she might lose Libby again, but asks that they go sit and then she can tell her everything. They find a spot, and Jean tells Libby that Marcia gave birth to her and dropped her off to be taken care of. After a while, Marcia came back for their mother's funeral and found that Jean and Libby were happy together, so she took Libby away. Libby is mad at Jean for not telling her this before. She storms out, enters her car, and drives to Marcia's. Marcia, in her usual proud manner, welcomes her in. She says Libby's skin is dry and offers her a serum for it. She starts talking about her lunch date, but Libby has something else in mind. She wants to know why her mom abandoned her. Marcia doesn't think it was a case of abandonment per se, but a case of an 18-year-old child with a child. Besides, she's not a natural mom. Libby voices that Marcia only came back for her because she wanted the happy life Jean shared with her. Marcia tries to explain her situation, but Libby doesn't care to listen. Libby wishes Marcia well on her lunch date and drives back to the farm. As she walks along the farm, she remembers when Marcia came to take her from Jean. Frank and Jean couldn't hold back their tears as Frank carried her over to Marcia. As the car drove off, Jean almost ran after it, sobbing. Libby gets herself back, and it all adds up now. Jean comes and taps her on the shoulder. Libby wants to know if there are more secrets, but Jean assures her that there are none. Libby instantly decides that she wants to live in the abandoned house with her kids. She accepts Jean's offer of running the farm, and Jean is happy with this. Libby is now at peace with life. She's sitting on the porch of her house when Jean comes with Libby's childhood pictures. This jigs Libby's memory as she begins remembering certain events. Libby begins fixing the yard when James shows up. He has just returned from El Paso, where he dropped off Aaron at her parents' place. He's gotten a clean shave and Libby acknowledges it. She tells James that the kids miss him a lot. James wants to know if she misses him too, and after a moment of silence, Libby kisses James on the lips. They hold hands and walk off.